Hi, my name is Danelle Street here with Beaducation.com. Today I want to show you some of my favorite techniques on stamping with design stamps. This is pretty much an intermediate class, so hopefully you've taken a look at some of the free classes that we have on beginning stamping. The techniques that you learn in those classes are great and essential, but we're going to take those techniques and turn them all the way upside down, use them in a whole new way to create these great scenes on blanks. So let's get started. Sometimes finding the idea and the inspiration of what to stamp on your blank can be the hardest part. Going for a walk, looking through magazines, your favorite book, or watching a movie, there's scenes and shots in those movies that you might want to recreate on a blank. So try to take inspiration from wherever you are and remember that scene and recreate it with design stamps. I have 4 samples that show different techniques, so let's take a look at those. Here I have 4 samples of different techniques I used in each of the blanks. Let's start off with the first one here with the hot air balloon. If we take a look at it closer, you will see that the house stamps that I used on the bottom, I didn't use the full impression anywhere on the stamp, but I like that because it gives it more of a feel like you're actually in the hot air balloon hovering over on top of the houses. So it gives it a different perspective in the picture. So we have a little one here and one behind it, again giving it depth. And the next one we have here is a storm. And here I used the cloud stamps over here. This is a good example of the technique of using just half of the stamp. If you look on the top cloud, I tilted the stamp to get only the top impression, and then the cloud below it, I used a full stamp, again giving it more dimension, and same with the clouds on the other side. The lightning bolt and the period stamp, just creating the rain. The umbrella stamps, one upside down, and one tilted to the side, again to mimic what would happen in a storm, the wind. The next one here is using flowers and the stems and branches. So there we have the different flowers in all sorts of directions, some of them overlapping each other, again creating the dimension and the different directions of the twigs and the branches and the little birds coming in, again just like in nature. And then the final one here is the sample that we're going to do today. And this one is the birch tree using the slash stamp. So here, this one is a little bit tricky because you just have to line up the slash and get the impression all the way up the tree to create the whole side of the tree, and using the slash at different angles, just the tips of them, to create the birch effect. And then again the clouds, getting half of the stamp on top and then layering the clouds on top to create the different dimension and the sun peeking out of the top. So these are all different techniques that we're going to use today. So here are the tools that you need for the project today. We have the plastic mallet, the 2-pound brass hammer, a Sharpie pen, Pro Polish pad, your design stamps, a bench block, and a pen and paper for sketching your design. So here's a collection of design stamps that I used in the samples that you saw. Everything from the hot air balloon to the house, the bicycles. These are just the stamps that I used, but take a look at the stamps that you have in your collection at home, and I'm sure you'll find some inspiration there. The materials that we're going to use today are a 24 gauge sheet of copper for practice, and I'm going to stamp out our design today on a 24 gauge 1-inch sterling silver circle, but you could use whatever gauge you'd like. So the first step to practicing your design, I like to get a piece of paper and trace my blank, which I've done already here, and then I just kind of draw out the design that I want to stamp out. So for example, we're doing the birch tree. So I'm just imagining the birch tree looking like this and some clouds hovering above and the sun coming out. And we're going to have the bikes here. It's a great drawing of a bike. And that's about it. So if I don't like how it's laid out here, I just keep drawing and sketching till I get a layout that I like. So now that we have our practice sketch, now we're going to transfer that to the copper. I've already traced my blank onto the copper, and we're going to practice stamping out the actual tree. So I have our slash design stamp, and I'm going to start from the bottom. And without lifting up the stamp, I'm just going to draw it up to do the next stamp. And by not lifting it, it creates a continuous line. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And to add the little detail, I'm going to hold the design stamp on its edge and just hit it from the side to create the little parts of the bark. And we're going to keep going to make the tree go all the way up to the top. So here's a close-up of our practice tree. And one tip that I really want to tell you is if you see the slash right here, every time you draw your stamp up to get the next impression, you kind of see a break in each section of the impression. That's a good place to put your detail of the birch bark, so the impression of the slash going through the tree trunk. So I've done that, added the detail there through the whole tree trunk. So next we're going to do the clouds, and I'm going to show you how to create the dimension in the stamps. So if you notice the cloud here, if you turn it upside down, it has a different shape. So let's start off in one direction, and I'm going to do an extreme tilt as I do the stamping. And if you notice, it's only half of the impression, and that's what I'm going for because I'm going to create another stamp right below it. But this time I'm going to do the full stamp. So I'm holding it tight and doing the tilt and tap to make sure I get the full impression. So if you notice with the stamping that we've just done, you'll see that we have the full stamp below of the cloud, and then above we just have a little bit of a cloud peeking out from behind it, and that's what we want to do, and we're going to continue on stamping more clouds. So this time I'm going to turn the stamp upside down to get the shape of the cloud going the other direction. Again, doing the tilt and tap to ensure the full impression, but now I'm going to turn the stamp on its side just to have the stamp on the top. And I didn't get the full impression there, so I'm going to go in again to get a little bit more of it. So since this is the copper, we're just kind of getting a practice of how the clouds lay out and getting our hands used to positioning it. So I think we've practiced enough with the clouds. So let's move on with the next part of the design, adding the sun and the branches and leaves. I added a couple of branches here for practice and leaves. And I also added the bike and the sun peeking out through the clouds to see how that would lay out. So the more you add to your blank, you'll notice that it starts to buckle, kind of get bubbly and wobbly. So at this point, you want to use your plastic mallet, not for stamping anything, but you're going to use it to actually flatten out the metal so it's easier to stamp as you go. So I'm going to flip over the copper and flatten it out with a plastic mallet. So now, I don't know if you could tell, but it lays a lot flatter now. So now that we've practiced on the copper, I think now we're ready to move on to the sterling blank. So here we have the sterling silver blank, the 1-inch 24 gauge blank, and we're going to go ahead and start stamping with the first step being the birch tree. So I have the slash stamp, and if you notice when I hover over the blank, you could really see the reflection. That's a great tip also. If you use your Pro Polish pad to shine up your blank, you'll get this really reflective surface. So that actually helps you line up your stamps as you go. So we can just start at the bottom, and I'm going to position the tree kind of in the middle. So starting off right here, and we can start stamping. And remember not to totally lift up your stamp, but just drag it across. And if you do lift up your stamp, that's okay. You could feel the groove from the previous stamp and just nudge it in there and just draw it back up again. So I did the first side of the trunk. Now I'm going to do the second. So we've changed the position of the camera so you will be able to see how tilting the stamp in different directions really affects the impression of the stamping. So I'm going to continue on with the second half of the tree trunk, and we're going to get going. So now I'm going to add the details of the birch bark, and to do so, remember we're going to create an extreme angle with the stamp. So instead of having it flat like you would for the tree trunk, we're going to tilt it really far, and then we're going to place it down and hammer, and doing it from both directions. Here's the front view of the tree, and now we're going to add the clouds. So we're going to start here with a full impression of the cloud. So to ensure that full impression, we're going to do the tilt and tap. And then I want the clouds to go across the whole top of the blank, even across the tree trunk. So I'm going to keep going. And we'll do a partial cloud kind of peeking out from behind two clouds. So that's when we're going to do that extreme tilt again with the stamp. So instead of being flat, we're going to tilt it on its side and just do it from the direction that you're going to tilt it. That's the same direction that the hammer is going to come. And I think I'm going to do a couple of those. one from the bottom as well. So I think we've stamped enough clouds here. Now we could add the other details of our scene. I'm going to add some tree branches now using, again, the slash at an extreme angle. And I like to put it in the spot where, again, there's a break in the stamping. And they're just little branches. And remember that the branches could be coming from all directions, maybe 2 branches off one. So just be creative. I think that's good. And now adding the leaves. And for some reason, I like to add the leaves in little clusters. So I'm doing it in 3s. And each time I do the leaf, they're not all facing the same direction. I'm doing it in all different directions. So now that I've finished adding my leaves, now I'm gonna move on to the rain. The rain's fun because it's just a period stamp and we're just gonna randomly do raindrops all over the place. So we're just gonna So I think that's good for now because I want to leave room for my bikes, and we'll do that now. So we have 2 bike stamps and I like them facing each other. So I'm just looking at the bottom of the stamp to make sure that it's going in the right direction. And I'm going to do the other bike. So it looks like I tried to get a full stamp of the bike, but it really didn't get the full impression, and I do want the whole bike to show. So how I fix this is I try to line up the stamp. You could kind of feel it go into the little stamp impression and it locks right in. So that's how I know that I'm in the right spot to re-stamp it. And there we go. And that's why the tilt and tap method is really important to get the full impression. So I have both bikes, and now I could do the sun peeking out from behind the clouds. And since it's only peeking out from the clouds, I'm only gonna do the top portion of the stamp. And again, doing it at an extreme angle. And again, it only did a little bit, so either right there, I could either re-stamp the sun, or I could add another cloud to have it really just a little bit peeking, but I want more sun, so I'm going to find the spot again. There we go. Now that we have our design all stamped out, now we could oxidize it. So I grabbed my Sharpie, and we're gonna really color it in, making sure that we get inside all the stamps. So I'm really scribbling all over the place. So coloring it all in, and once I do that, making sure you get all the little raindrops. Then we can polish it up. Now that we've completed our design, we've oxidized it and pro-polished it. Now it's all nice and shiny. So we're all done. So hopefully this will inspire you to look at all the design stamps that you have and put them together in ways that you might not have thought of before, and create little scenes on the blanks that you have. Have fun.